Good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. And welcome to December's third Thursday, which is new developments in avalanche safety and rescue. We have an all-star cast tonight, including Michael Fingers, who's the assistant commander with the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, Jason Tanner, Trent with the Avalanche Utah Avalanche Center, Jim Collison, and Oyvind. And tonight we're going to have several different speakers and a couple different presentations. We will take questions in between presentations, probably for 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next one. If we don't get to your question, be patient. We'll take them at the end. If you do have a question, Ella Foskett's going to be facilitating the question and answer periods. So please put your question into the chat box and she'll read them off. And that way we can get to everybody and be much more efficient and organized. Tonight's a big presentation, so I'm not going to take any more time. And I'd just like to introduce Michael Finger, who's going to take it from here.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for showing up right before Christmas. Maybe it's a good break from all the holiday fun. So this was kind of titled New Developments in Avalanche Safety and Rescue, but it's a little bit old stuff and new stuff. The agenda for tonight, how do I do my next? There we go. So yeah, we'll start with a quick intro. Oyvind, he was the ICAR Avalanche delegate, primary delegate for a while, and got a relationship going with the Mountain Safety Info Database. And he's going to talk a little bit about that and how to access it. Trent from the Utah Avalanche Center is going to talk a little bit about the Know Before You Go program and just give some, I guess, quick tips on dealing with the public and avalanche safety. Then Dr. Jason Tanner will give a quick refresher on dealing with medical issues resulting from avalanche incidents and cover some new research in this area. And then we're going to top it off with story time with Jim Collinson from the Alta Ski area, and Snowbird is going to talk about some hard lessons learned in avalanche terrain. So I guess we'll go to Oyvind to start.
I'll just say next, since Mike is controlling my my presentation. So if you can go back, Mike. Thank you, Mike. My name is Oyvind Henningsen. I'm a rescuer with Everett Mountain Rescue, which is just north of Seattle. And like Mike said, I'm the previous MRA delegate to ICAR. And in that capacity, I became involved with the working group in ICAR that has developed or had led into the development of mountainsafety.info. And it was started by Manuel Genschwein, and it's available to all of us. It's an international knowledge database developed by, best practices in mountain safety, developed by subject matter experts worldwide. It's a not-for-profit organization registered in Switzerland. And we have subject matter experts from the rescue field, from mountain guiding, research, alpine associations, military mountaineering groups, etc. And we develop best practices on different subjects collaboratively and in many different languages at the same time. I forgot to say next, Mike. There you go. Okay. We'll skip to the next one then right away. Okay, so thank you for everyone. After Doug sent out the sort of the how-to and the intro letter earlier this week, a bunch of new people signed up, so really appreciate that. So MSI, it's a paid annual subscription, and it costs about $700 for the MRA. To have this resource available to all MRA members for a whole year. There's a detailed PDF presentation on the website, MRA website, on how to set up your individual account and how to use the MSI. And there's also a presentation link to a presentation on YouTube that Manuel Genschwein did a presentation for the MRA about a little less than a year ago, and that's also linked on the MRA website. Next, please. So MSI has started with the topic of avalanche rescue, but we're currently working on first aid, mountain emergency medicine, and the newest topic, which is avalanches and risk management topics. Next. So I wanted to just provide a quick and short example on how to use mountainsafety.info as an MRA member. For example, very simple explanation here. If you're teaching an avalanche class and you want to teach your students how to interpret the distance indication given on the avalanche transceiver. Next. So this is a tool that's available to you. You would log in and you would scroll onto the avalanche rescue topics, scroll down to transceivers and click transceivers. Next. And scroll on to the topic on how to interpret the signals from your transceiver. You can put that into your shopping cart, and it's all for free, of course, and log out. Next. The website will send you an email that will contain some files, and you can also download them directly from the website. Next. And here's how the files look like. There will be two very large, in this example, two very large PDF and a PNG file, and a bunch of more detailed illustrations that you can download and incorporate in your class material, presentations or handouts or what have you. Next. Here's how to interpret your signals from your transceiver, the large illustration. Next. Okay, next, please. There you go. Thank you, Mike. Oh, one back, one back. And here's how to interpret a distance indication of 1 meter and how you can help illustrate to the students that's the 1 meter in a 3D dimensional picture. Next. Here's an illustration also supporting the same topic that, when your transceiver shows 5 meters, the sending transceiver is 5 meters or closer. It's a very important learning. It's not further away, it's 5 meters or closer. Next. So last year took a bit of a toll for the in-person meeting of mountainsafety.info working group, but we've done a lot of work online, and the collaboration has continued remotely, and it's even expanded, and there's a bunch of new contributors from around the world, and there's several other supporting organizations that have come on board. There's many new illustrations that have been developed, and of particular interest to the MRA members might be that the organized rescue topics have been expanded and medical illustrations have increased, and that the Avalife medical protocols have been finished and are available in a finished form online. Next. Here's a couple of examples of the conveyor belt shoveling illustrations that have been expanded. Next. And how to manage the snow when extricating people from deep burials. Next. organized avalanche rescue operations have been expanded with many new slides. There are in works full-scale comprehensive illustrations for organized rescue management, both for backcountry rescue and for rescues in inhabited areas, including roads, railroads, and houses. Next. Here's a couple of examples of some of the medical illustrations that are provided in the MSI. These are just a few examples, you guys. There's tons of these illustrations available. Next. Here is the avalanche resuscitation protocols that have been completed to assist both basic life support and advanced life support rescuers facing questions like if and when to start CPR, how to treat for hypothermia, etc. in avalanche accidents. Next. And for the future, these are the topics that were currently on the agenda for the group and that are should be available within short time. Big illustrations for organized avalanche rescue management. A lot of topics under avalanche prevention and risk management. And then we're starting into via ferrata, best practices in via ferrata rescues and best practices in rock and ice rescues. So we're continually expanding mountainsafety.info. Are there any questions that I might answer? That's pretty much concludes my presentation here, but I would really encourage all of the MRA members to try this resource out and see if you can get something from it, you know, either as an individual or as a mountain rescue organization.
Stop the share. I think Trent can pick it up now.
Cool. Let's see what I did to myself here. You want me to just roll right in?
Are we good to go? Any more questions?
Or any questions? Sorry about it.
We do have one question. Mark asks, is there a way for mountainsafety.info to show which graphics I have already downloaded in previous sessions so I can look at only the ones that have been added since then?
You know, Mark, if you look at your history on your account, it should show that. But as far as showing which ones are new, we don't really have that feature because we're making tweaks. Like I saw a couple of spelling mistakes the other day on a couple of slides. So then they would have been classified as new. So they're continuously updated, Mark. So I'm afraid there's no such thing right now.
All right, that's all the questions we have for that part of the presentation.
Thank you, Ella.
Cool. Well, I'll jump right in. So yeah, Mike asked me to talk a little bit about Know Before You Go and kind of communicating to the public. And I'll kind of share just a couple new insights here with everyone tonight. I do have a couple of slides. So before I get to Know Before You Go 3.0, we've had a lot of really good success with Know Before You Go, what I'm going to refer to as 2.0 now. We redid that in 2015. It's had really, really good success. People seem to still be stoked on it. Between Utah and Colorado, we hit roughly 10,000 people per year.
So it's still a pretty good number. We did some online learning, and we've had 21,000 people complete the online learning courses. So the video just in itself has been seen up to 2 million times kind of worldwide. The other really cool thing is I think it's now in like 13 different languages, which is really nice, and kind of a pretty nice global program. There's a lot of other places in the world that just don't have the funding or the Avalanche resources, and they use the Know Before You Go program pretty widely. So with that being said, we're undertaking perhaps the largest avalanche awareness like program, or I guess like size and budget wise. The budget for the new Know Before You Go program is pretty huge. We have some really good support and sponsors backing it. And so we're going to roll this thing out in fall of 2022, which is really cool. And I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of what it's like. So right now, currently the Know Before You Go program 2.0 is about a 15-minute video and a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation to the public. And then that's sort of it. This new version, you kind of, I'll explain this in a minute, but it's actually made up, we have a committee of people right now. So I've got Avalanche Canada, or the Canadian Avalanche Center, excuse me, they've changed their name. And then we've got Colorado, we've got NWAC, or the Northwest Avalanche Center, as well as the National Avalanche Center, all on an advisory committee helping us kind of put this package together. And our goal is to build a customizable avalanche awareness framework based on a global set of standards. So that advisory committee is kind of helping put together what is that global set of standards. And you'd think it would be easy, but it's quite complicated when you try to get, the first 15 people to agree just on like what is like the starting point to avalanches. And that's really what this project's about, is like, I'm hoping that, there's a lot of technical stuff out there in the world with regards to avalanches, but I'm really hoping that we can just pick a starting point and say, okay, this is where everybody should start. And this is what the learning looks like. But basically what happens is what we're going to do, we're going to create a core to the program. So we're actually losing 2 of the 5 points. So currently there's like get the gear, get the training, get the forecast, get the picture, and get out of harm's way. We're going to lose the 2 latter from the program. 1, to kind of shorten it up and keep those learning concepts a little bit more simple. But more important is it just makes the program, in my opinion, really nice. We're going to have a video, a website. We'll have the get the gear, the get the training, and get the forecast. Kind of that is the core or the starting point to Know Before You Go. From there, any avalanche center or any organization or safety organization or somebody that wants to give an avalanche presentation, you'll be able to contact us. And what's really nice is you'll be able to localize it. So it's a lot like software, right? Like you buy the initial package and then somebody comes in and designs it specifically for you. Sort of like Smart Mountain or any of these other, mountain programs that patrollers are using to like map out their explosive work and their stuff on the mountain. And then obviously it's from there you can add get the picture, and you can add get out of harm's way. So if you want to take it a little bit deeper, you can. And then obviously we'll have this e-learning and this advanced awareness presentation. So let me just another little view of how this could look. So Know Before You Go is really made up of just like you show up to an REI, somebody shows you the video and 45-minute talk, and you just went through Know Before You Go. This time it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have actually 4 components that stand on their own. So we'll have that presentation content, we'll have the video, but we're redesigning a brand new website, and then we'll have a full-on online learning platform, a whole new redesign, which will be really, really cool. And then obviously we kind of have management side. You have that advisory committee that I was talking about, and then we'll have the steering committee that's kind of looking at the next 5 years of the program and where the program's going, and then marketing, project management, fundraising. So at a high level glance, these are kind of the branches. So one side you could think of as management, and the other side you could think of as kind of like the program. The really cool thing here is Sherpa Cinema has been awesome enough to sign up, and they are filming the entire film. You can ignore some of the text here, but like we've signed our contracts with them. They have already begun filming. They'll be filming this entire winter. So we're really amped. I don't know if anybody knows who Sherpa Cinema is or the company, but they did like the Fine Line in 2019. If anybody's seen La Liste or La Liste 2, basically, I think they're the best mountain film company in the world. And luckily enough, they're all a bunch of dirtbag skiers as well as really good filmers, and avalanches are near and dear to their heart. So it's been a great, great partnership working alongside of them. A little bit of a high level timeline here. You can see that we've been working on this all summer. We have partners, sponsors, and fundraising. We've been doing a little bit of filming last spring, and then obviously we've really been doing a lot of the like platforming, looking for web developers. We just hired on a project manager. So it's a pretty large scale project, and we're hoping again that launch will be October 1st of next year. So just about 11 months from now. I know that was really quick with a kind of a major update and an overhaul to a really cool program. Does anybody have any questions on that? Can I look at the chat? Will that show me if there's questions?
It doesn't look like we have any questions.
Okay, so I confused everyone.
Thanks, Trent.
You are welcome. I can stop sharing here. Here we go.
So I guess the partnership we did with the UAC will be at the, I guess it was a 2.0 program, but in the grand scheme of things, you're going to just kind of standardize this and push it out to any organization that wants to get avalanche education in front of people.
Yeah, Mike, good question. But the important thing to remember is, yes, it'll be a standardized program.
Customized, standardized.
Yep, but you'll be able to take it and like customize it to fit the audience that you need. And of course, as always, you know, we'd love to work with whomever that has a great, you know, mission and goals to tweak it enough where it works for them. So yeah, currently we did do a really cool product with you for the 2.0 content, but you know, we're working on this in the background. So we'll push forward, and next year, maybe over the summer, we should chat about getting everything incorporated for a 3.0 look and feel.
Okay, great.
No, it's okay, cool, yeah.
Any other?
Mike, can I get you to center yourself with your camera there? There you go.
Sorry. Is that better? I can't see my camera because I'm.
You're good now.
Okay.
How many people are from Utah in this crowd? Is it kind of all over the place? Because I heard somebody from Washington and.
I mean, I guess the presentation itself, I don't know like I said, I'm kind of in the different mode, but you know, the MRA, this would encompass, the invitation was sent out to all of the MRA teams on the, probably to the, you know, we have email for, so, which can span from, I mean, obviously West Coast, I'm not sure how far, Pennsylvania, we might go further east than that now, I don't know, so.
All right, we got an Oregon, cool. Well, anyway, thank you for having me tonight. And next year, or kind of next June or July, we're hoping to have this ready to get into presenters' hands so we can work on that customization stuff. So be sure to reach out if this is a, you know, a product or a program. I think it's going to be badass. The budget's huge. Mammut is a giant title sponsor, so I think it's going to be a really great program. We're excited.
And I think, you know, one of the components of the MRA is the PSARs, or public safety outreach. type programs, so I think, those teams that are out there that like get asked to go talk about avalanches in the winter or something, this might be a great opportunity to grab something and have some really snazzy video, for the Boy Scout troop or something versus like death by PowerPoint. So.
And that's our number one goal, is the new program is not death by PowerPoint. So it should be engaging. It should be, flashy, good content, but also we're really shooting to make it more interactive. So we'd rather have more discussion-based learning versus just like, here's a slide, here's a slide, here's a slide, right? Don't do this, don't do that. So, yeah, we're excited. Hopefully we can pull it off. I've been freaking out a little bit too, though.
So.
Well, thank you guys.
No, thank you for joining us. I think Dr. Jason Tanner was up next.
Sure, I can share my screen here and see if I can get up and going. Mine is more death by PowerPoint, a little bit, unfortunately.
You usually have some good pictures in there, though. So
I try the GIFs. I try, but they don't work as well on Zoom. I find. I don't know if my internet connection is just bad, but let's see. I start this. I'm technologically impaired. So thanks for Mike and for everybody for inviting me out to talk a little bit today. Yeah, my name is Jason Tanner. I'm actually a third-year resident in emergency medicine at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. Not a lot of avalanches in Connecticut at all, but previously to this, I was part of the Salt Lake County SAR team, which is how I know Mike. That's where I grew up. That's where I did med school and everything. Came out here for residency. So today I'm going to try and talk a little bit about avalanches and some of the medical aspects of it. And, it's a big topic and it's kind of hard to cover over, 15 minutes or so. But I'll try and go over a little bit and then hopefully give a couple of more recent updates that I've been able to find. But you probably all know these data, basically causes of avalanche fatalities in the US. The majority of them are asphyxiation, up to around 75%. And then a quarter, of people in avalanches are killed by trauma. And then a minority, a very small number, end up being killed by the hypothermia. We'll talk a little bit about these. I'm not going to talk much about trauma today from avalanches, just because there's not a whole lot different about it. The trauma is, you manage the trauma as you manage it. And if they're traumatically injured in the avalanche and dead by the time you get there, then there's really not much you can do about it. But we'll talk a bit about asphyxiation and everything else, and then some of the resources that we talked a little bit about earlier. Asphyxia is basically what kills the majority of people who are buried in an avalanche. It's basically a hypoxia and hypercapnia, a decrease in your oxygen, increase in your CO2. The CO2 levels become markedly elevated. And this is a result of being able to not being able to ventilate. You're down there, you're buried, and there's a couple ways you can think about it. It's airway obstruction is a main issue. Snow, ice, everything gets crammed into your mouth and throat. Airway gets obstructed, and basically they can asphyxiate from that. You can also be packed so tightly and buried in this debris that you end up having restricted chest wall movement, and you just can't, move your chest, and that contributes too. If for some reason you're lucky enough, the patient doesn't have an obstructed airway, they may have an air pocket. You can still have this kind of progressive hypoxia, progressive asphyxia that comes from basically rebreathing exhaled air in a closed space. Just to kind of review that, basically regular atmospheric air is 21% oxygen and only about 0.03% CO2. Exhaled air is only 16% oxygen because your body uses some of it. And then you exhale a bunch of CO2, 5%. And if you just repeatedly exhale and then rebreathe that, you get progressively less oxygen, progressively more CO2, and then that can eventually lead to cardiac arrest and death. If there's an air pocket and then condensation comes on, and seals that, starts to freeze on that air pocket from your breath, then that can accelerate it by creating this airtight barrier by the ice mask. And so these are kind of the mechanisms of how that works. Jumping a little bit to hypothermia, we'll talk more about this, but I just wanted to throw this up real quick. It's a rare cause of death in avalanche accidents, and the reason for this is that the rate that the body cools when it's buried under the snow is usually not fast enough to cause any life-threatening levels of hypothermia in less than 60 to 90 minutes. The rates of cooling they kind of vary in the literature, but generally it's thought of as around, from what I understand, 3 degrees Celsius per hour is how fast your body can cool buried in an avalanche or in snow. So if your normal temperature is 37 degrees Celsius and then you're there for an hour, after an hour you're at 34 degrees, you're hypothermic, you go 2 hours, you're at 31 and so forth. Really the risk of cardiac arrest becomes highest when you get below 30 degrees. And so I threw this little slide up here just to kind of show some of there's a revised Swiss system of hypothermia staging. I'll show a comparison here in a minute, but this is a revised system they published just April of last year. And it focuses on the risk of cardiac arrest correlated with mostly mental status. And it's a pretty useful way of thinking about stages of hypothermia. So really the high risk of cardiac arrest is when you get to stage 3, where you're getting to that umbles part where you're moving to unconsciousness and not really you're having some altered mental status. And so like I said, this is kind of a revised Swiss system. The old Swiss system I've got up here on the side, which I say old, it's probably still usable in a lot of texts and places, but it's more, it looks at vitals as well as mental status and correlates with core body temperature. And you can see once you get to unconsciousness and apparent death where you lose vital signs, you lose a pulse, the core temperature estimated is all the way down at 24 degrees Celsius. So the WMS, Wilderness Medical Society, has their own, another way of staging these mild, moderate, severe, and they've got, all the way down to 32 to 28, and then really below 28 is where you have some severe, profound hypothermia. Between moderate and severe is where you start to get into high risk of cardiac arrest from primarily hypothermia, and that's where you get that. So if you're cooling, if it's just pure hypothermia for whatever reason, imagine solo skier caught in a slide and injured, not buried, but is unable to get out, unable to get help, is kind of stuck out there, injured, traumatic, hypothermic. They can become like this, and there's lots of scenarios you can imagine, but typically not a common primary cause of death in avalanches. And so, one of the hardest questions that I always had, or I feel like is hardest what to decide is when do you start CPR, when do you stop CPR? And there's algorithms, which I'll talk about, that really help with that decision making. In all of this, I find that it's helpful to kind of try and simplify things and think about what's the cause of this cardiac arrest. If it's a traumatic cardiac arrest, so you say you find you have a victim, they have obvious signs of major trauma, likely the trauma that killed them, very low survival rate. That's not a cardiac arrest that you're going to be working. On the other hand, is this a patient you think is in cardiac arrest because of the asphyxiation, because of hypoxia and hypercapnia? If this is the case, then this is kind of the typical drill that we always have. Airway is king in avalanche rescue and medicine. You get their airway, you make sure it's open, you give them breaths, and then you check for a pulse, start CPR. Basic ALS or BLS, ABCs. And if you get to a state of where there's no sign of airway issues, you think this is a hypothermic arrest, then avalanche or not, you're in that whole separate hypothermia algorithm where and won't get into a whole lot of detail, but if you're worried about hypothermia causing cardiac arrest and you think that it's been that it's something viable you can bring back. You can do CPR and ACLS and transport, and you can do this over hours. We'll get into a bit of like intermittent and mechanical CPR. I threw a couple pictures up here. These are, I don't know if people are familiar with mechanical CPR. There's a couple of machines that you can use to do compressions when you don't have people to do them, or if you're transporting or doing it for a long period of time. You put this machine on, it dumps on their chest and does the compressions for you so that you don't have to. A lot of EMS agencies around the country are using these now. I think most, if not all. No, everyone around here does. And in Salt Lake, they were, in the city at least. It's an option if you have somebody out who you're trying to carry out. And with all of this, work really closely with your EMS and local protocols, but something that is a pretty cool option and useful tool. So then moving to some of these algorithms, I don't know if you see that okay. Let's go back. I threw the one up here from the European Resuscitation Council guidelines were published just this last April 2021, kind of updated European guidelines for cardiac arrest in multiple different situations. They're really good guidelines to be, you can look at and apply to a lot of situations. Their avalanche rescue algorithm is pretty much the same thing as all the others out there, but it's nice and simple, and I threw that up here just for reference. ICAR has their avalanche victim resuscitation checklist, which is also a very great tool worth checking out. The WMS practice guidelines, of course, and then the Avalife algorithms that we brought up before. Those are great. They actually walk you through it a little bit more detailed, and it can be used as a record and a useful tool to take with the patient through a whole process. You can write on them on the scene and such. But just kind of going through this, because kind of getting back to this question, like how do you decide what to do? So it all starts with assessing the patient at the extrication, and that's kind of obvious, right? You bring a patient, you find them, dig them out, then you're trying to assess whether they have any lethal injuries, signs of major trauma, any signs of lethal trauma, things like decapitation, massive head injury, things like that. If there's massive trauma after an avalanche, or if they've been there long enough, their whole body is frozen, you can't do chest compressions because the chest wall is just too stiff, you don't need to start CPR. That patient's dead. If you don't find any signs of lethal trauma, then the next question is how long have they been buried? And that correlates with their core temperature, but measuring core temperature is not really practical or accurate in field settings. If they say have been buried for less than an hour, so this is like companion rescue, you've been down for 20 minutes, you find them, you dig them out, or you're on ski patrol and you find them after an avalanche close by. If you're able to get to them without an hour, get them unburied, you dig them out, then it's basic ABCs, your regular ALS algorithms, where airways first, open that up, get them some breaths, check for pulse. If they don't have pulse, start CPR, and then you're within a time frame that you can still work it and get them either to EMS, and they can use their protocols to decide whether to terminate or continue with the resuscitation, or you can just keep moving on with it. In a situation where it's been over an hour, they've been buried for longer than 60 minutes, it becomes a little more tricky. This is where first you want to check for a pulse. Are there any vital signs? If they have a pulse after being buried for an hour, that's great. You want to gently move them and get them dug out, and then start treating them for hypothermia, start rewarming them. If in that process they go into cardiac arrest, you lose a pulse, then start CPR, go through your whole algorithms, your ACLS, get in touch with EMS, and get them quickly to a hospital, because that is a situation where they may be able to do some rewarming with ECMO and other things to get them back. So if they don't have a pulse in the beginning, it's been over an hour and there's no vital signs and no pulse, go back to your universal ALS, you're going ABCs. If you have paramedics who are there, or somebody who can put them on a monitor, or even better, a pre-hospital 12 lead, and figure out well, you want to see what rhythm it is, initially at least. That can make a difference. Most settings, that's not going to happen. Just do they have a pulse or not? If they don't have a pulse, next question is, do they have an airway? When you dug them out, was their airway obstructed? If that's the case, and they've been down for more than an hour, they had an obstructed airway, they probably died of asphyxiation, a long time before you got to them. And you can talk about, considering stopping CPR at that point. If they were never obstructed, there still could be some of that delayed asphyxiation or that progressive, but it raises the possibility that there's some contribution of hypothermia to this cardiac arrest, and becomes more complicated. So in that state, we get into this, is this hope survival probability and other things. That's not something that we do in the field. I'll talk about that, but this is where it becomes a little harder. And if it's more than an hour, they have an open airway, they always had an open airway, you get into deciding whether this is hypothermia or not. Just since we mentioned it, the HOPE score and the ICE score, just as so people may hear about them, these require measurements of serum potassium and an accurate core temperature, and it's a decision aid to really kind of decide whether this is a patient who has a probability of survival after being on ECMO, which is basically bypass, where you can oxygenate and rewarm the blood outside the body and put it back. That's a pretty extreme measure for hypothermia, really. And that's kind of one of the ways that you can, at least in the hospital, decide that. So all of this is illustrated really well with the Avalanche algorithms that are available on the MSI that was described before. And it walks you through it in a little bit more detailed way. And it's a very useful kind of step-by-step way to go about it in training, and also potentially, in the field and when you're dealing with this in real life. When I can kind of run through these quickly, but when do you want to work an avalanche code when somebody's in cardiac arrest? Obviously, if there's no pulse, they're not breathing, no signs of life. If they've been under for less than an hour, then it's probably due to asphyxiation. You want to start doing CPR and working. General guidelines say you can do that for 20 minutes. And if you don't get a pulse back and there's no EMS showing up, there's no way you're going to transport, then you're probably okay at that point to terminate and stop. But use your local EMS protocols. Every county, every state has a little bit different rules about that. And then if the burial time is more than an hour and there's no airway obstruction, then you have to think this might be hypothermia. This is one where you can transport. You can do CPR for long periods of time, either with the machines, like I mentioned, or through an intermittent CPR, which is basically you do CPR for 5 or 10 minutes, you stop, carry the patient for as far as you can, stop again, do more CPR for 5 or 10 minutes, transport for 5 minutes, and you just do this intermittently. It's very inefficient. It takes forever to get anywhere with that. And, but the reality is, if you have somebody who you think is arresting because of hypothermia, and it's pretty more pure hypothermia, then you can do that for hours. And there are these case reports of people regaining spontaneous circulation after being rewarmed at a hospital. So it's something to consider. Definitely all of this is, it's important to coordinate closely with your local EMS, and they with medical direction as well. They can call whatever hospital and talk to the doctor there and discuss with them as well if there's any questions. The one rule of thumb is never worry alone. You can always talk to people and worry together and figure it out. The other way to think about this, I think, is somewhat useful, is when to not work it. So if a burial time over an hour with airway obstruction, you don't need to usually go further with that. That patient unfortunately died. If there's any obvious signs of trauma, obvious death, or if there's whole body frozen, too stiff to do anything, again, talk to online medical control, follow your local EMS protocols. And so that's kind of the avalanche side of it. Probably getting long on time here, but real quick, I just wanted to touch base on hypothermia because this is not a cause of fatality in avalanches very commonly, but it's a major problem for survivals of avalanches, and also for members of the party who were with the patient who may have died. And so it's a primary issue for SAR teams who are evacuating avalanche survivors or their parties. And these patients have potentially trauma, likely trauma. They're going to be immobile. They have prolonged evacuation potentially. The first thing an avalanche does is take off your hat and gloves when it grabs you. So, lost clothing and gear, they're not going to be able to get out as fast. And then they're going to have all their clothing they still have on is going to be soaking wet. And then you take them out of the burial and they're exposed to wind and weather with cold clothes and without gloves, hat, everything else that they may have lost. So this is like a perfect setup for bad hypothermia. And that's going to be the main thing that most SAR teams who arrive that late are going to be dealing with. And so one reference from that, it's a few years old now, and probably longer, but it was published in the clinical practice guidelines for the WMS in 2019, is this cold card. And I really like this. I don't know how many are familiar with it. I know we've kind of discussed it a bit with the Salt Lake team. It's a great reference that you can find on these websites on the WMS. It's a PDF you can print, and you can make it small. You can make a little card, laminate it, keep it in your kit, keep it in your radio pack or wherever. And just it's a nice reference to maybe those people who don't think about hypothermia every day. How do you recognize the signs of mild to moderate? How do you see when people are getting hypothermic? And then on the back side of it is, how do you treat that? And some suggested supplies as well. He has a diagram of just a reminder of how to do a hypothermia wrap. So this is a great reference for something if maybe people don't do this every day, to just have. And there's a lot of helpful tips there. And I wanted one quick word about this situation or this phenomenon called after drop. This is basically after you get somebody out of an avalanche or out of a cold situation, you start to rewarm them. You start to have continued decrease of their core temperature as you start to rewarm them. And that's because as you increase blood flow, say to the extremities that are cold, warm blood from the core goes to the extremities, gets cold again, goes back to the core and cools the core temperature. This is important because if the patient is at that moderate to severe hypothermia and in that threshold where it's kind of higher risk, they're going to drop their core temperature a bit once we start rewarming, and that increases the risk of cardiovascular instability and cardiac arrest. So it's just something to be aware of. The way you want to mitigate this risk is keep them horizontal, limit their activity, don't get them up and running right away, unless they're like just mildly hypothermic. And that's where that cold card can help. Then some physical activity can be useful. But generally, if they're like moderately to severely hypothermic, you want to keep them horizontal, limit their activity, limit their extremity movement, and then handle them very gently to minimize any risk of cardiac arrest and problems from that. So that's an important phenomenon to be aware of. Again, these European Resuscitation Council guidelines have a whole algorithm for hypothermia, and the WMS has things like this as well. So I won't go through all of this. It's really detailed and gets into some technical stuff, but it's a useful reference for those who are interested. So that's kind of all I had. I know it's kind of a quick run through of some of the more latest things I found. With that, I thought a nice warm beach would be a nice picture after all that. And I can answer any questions that might have come up.
We have two questions for this section. The first one is, Jamie asks, why is PT sex part of the Hope and ICE score?
Let's see, why is which? PT, go back to that.
That would be the patient's sex.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think there's just in the studies they found that there was some part of that was helpful in determining the outcomes, or at least getting probability. I will say the data on both of these scores is not great. I think it was I don't remember what they rated it, but it's hard to study this. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that.
All right, we have one more question. Gordon asks, for people who were very hypothermic, not breathing, and resuscitated, do you have any info about long-term brain damage or other impairments?
There's not a lot of long-term data because it depends on how long they've been out. I mean, I know the hypothermia itself is protective to the brain. Yeah, so somebody who goes into cardiac arrest, they're already hypothermic. You can, it's by itself protective to be cold, and so they have a better chance of good neurological outcome if you can get them to that point and rewarm them and everything else goes well. The reason I don't have a good number is there's just I don't think a lot of cases of that happening, and so I don't think there's good data on outcome, but I'll look into that too. I don't really know.
Jason, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. And Michael, you're back up.
Let me stop sharing. I don't know how to stop sharing. Hang on a sec. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
Stop share. There it is.
Thank you, Dr. Tanner. Jason was on the Salt Lake County Search and Rescue team for a while and had to go to his residency on the other coast. So hopefully we'll see him back soon. Up next, so we're done with the questions. Up next, we've got Jimmy Collinson. He was going to share some of the hard lessons learned in dealing with avalanche terrain. He was just gonna, I don't think he had a presentation per se, but will he show up on the video, or is there a way to grab that as the share screen? I'm not sure on the, or if you stop sharing.
Michael, if you share your screen, you want to make sure that you hit before you share optimize video clip and share sound, 2 check boxes in the lower left-hand corner.
He was just going to use my camera. Will that pop him up then?
We'll see.
Okay, and then screen, or we're not sharing the screen, right? He's just going to use my camera.
Okay, well, we can see you. So whatever your camera can see, we're good. Okay,
cool. Well, I'll have him scoot into place. One thing I was like, how do you introduce someone like Jimmy Collinson that has so much experience? And I was thinking, I think you can tell a lot about someone by how they raise their kids. And his son John is a Red Bull athlete, and I know his daughter Angel. I think she retired from professional skiing, I believe, very recently, but she was probably one of the best skiers, male or female, in the world. So I'll put it at that. Have them take a chair.
People always ask me if I'm Angel and John's dad, and it's like, no, those are my kids.
Is it centered okay?
You are, you're looking good.
Okay. All right. Hi, Jimmy Collinson here, and I'm honored that Mike asked me to speak, and I'd like to thank the Mountain Rescue Association for sponsoring Wasatch Backcountry Rescue, WBR, which I'm a big part of, for full membership in ICAR, the International Commission Alpine Rescue, a while back now. You were the first member from the US, and WBR was the second. I spent the last 40-some years patrolling Little Cottonwood Canyon at Alton Snowbird, Utah. Half of that time as a ski area forecaster whose job is opening, closing, and controlling avalanche terrain as needed. Though poorly paid, it's a very rewarding workplace, hanging out in closed areas with your crew, playing army with artillery, bombs, and radios, and skiing powder, lots of powder, dishing up powder, snow skiing to the public along the way. I spent a lot of time in the mountains of the West, both summer and winter, and participated in many backcountry rescues. Passion of mine has been training avalanche dogs and handlers. Mike suggested I speak about hard lessons learned. I thought to speak on some lessons that aren't often taught. I hope you find these stories useful and remember them. We suffered an in-area avalanche fatality on my watch years ago. Quite a sad deal, big deal in the media. My take-homes from it were a reiteration of the belief in turning snow into moguls from the dirt up. The public is our greatest tool in creating a safer snowpack at a ski area. Let no snowflake lie undisturbed is the goal. Second is that there needs to be a director of snow safety at all Class A avalanche areas. I lost an arm wrestling match on this one with the ski patrol assistant director. My position was equal to his assistant director of snow safety, who did not have a director of snow safety. The only Class A ski area without one that I knew of. I wanted it opened and skied that slope when it was all facets, but the patrol assistant director said the cover was too thin and we'd be asking for trauma if we did. The determining factor for opening terrain should be if we're able to get a toboggan out of the area. People do remarkably well, especially with helmets, at not getting hurt when we open on thin snow. And the skiers do get hurt because of the thin snowpack. It isn't negative international news. Third thing I learned out of that one, I was really quick on scene with a dog, and the place was already a mayhem of activity with skiers and riders out of their equipment, contaminating the site, looking for the missing skier. Their help was needed, but I could have used 3 probers to adequately search all the areas of interest the dog showed because of the contamination. I had none. Was one of those spots of interest the victim? I'll never know. But the patrolman running the column that hit her said there was a small hole that he thought my dog had dug very near her. More help probing, and who knows? There have been very few live dog recoveries in North America with folks not protected by a vehicle or structure. That was one chance. Another was a backcountry avalanche in the Wasatch, 87 or so. Powderbirds overflew a fresh avalanche on the Figure 8 hill between Brighton and Solitude ski areas with a woman at the top of the slope flagging them down. Landing a guide, they came inbound for more rescuers. There was no signal on a beacon search, and his wife had said he had one. I'm second on scene with a Bernese mountain dog, our best dog, which wasn't saying much. Got a last seen point from the wife and got to work. The dog worked as well as he ever had and in favorable conditions. Light density debris and a gentle downslope breeze, nothing. I'm thinking the guy's either really deep or she has his last seen point wrong. 2 large male shepherds traverse in, one from Solitude, one from Brighton. Dogfight, perfect. 4th dog on scene, a 1-year-old female lab flies in and finds this fella after a 50-minute burial with now 30 rescuers on site that have traversed in from the ski areas, heavily contaminating the place. He was 3 feet deep next to a small tree and uncompacted debris, plenty of scent rise. He was warm enough that CPR was given for a bit. I didn't sleep well that night. So the next evening found me chatting with the assistant ski patrol director, different fellow, about how that dog was inadequate despite my best efforts training it. And I could never work that dog again in the real thing with any confidence. His dog. Boy, did that change our relationship. The young lad who made the find was the first lab used in the Wasatch Mountains for avalanche work. Needless to say, I was sold on labs. For me, the incident crystallized the need to properly select puppies of known breeds for the best chance of success in finding people buried under the snow. Also to have the ability to cull mediocrity. On a larger scale, that incident was the beginning of WBR dog schools and more inter-patrol relations. The victim's backpack flew back to the heli base with me after the recovery. Deputy opened it up. The guy who performed the beacon search was present. There was a Peeps on top. I was looking at the guide's eyes while the deputy unzipped the cloth pouch they used to wear around the Peeps and found it in the off position. The guide's eyes rolled back in his head. I saw him this summer and talked about that moment we never had before, and he remembered it quite well indeed. I was buried on the job as a younger patrolman, dug up blue and unbreathing under a small tree whose branches interfered with my extrication. The area we were in had been closed for 6 days, and there were natural and triggered avalanches on slopes that we had not witnessed activity on in the ski area's 18-year history. This is snowbird. 3 other patrolmen had eyes on me, and I was buried at my last seen point because of a curtain of trees that had stopped me and piled the debris deeply against them. Shovels were difficult to use because of the branches, and one of my partners, a former college football player we called the Ox, moved a huge amount of snow using his arms as a scoop. For some reason, before I passed out, I thought to spit out my Copenhagen. It didn't work so well. Ox, who saved my life and a chewer himself, he didn't want to kiss me. It was chew all over my mouth and face. Lessons learned on that one. Well, I'd given the shot I had for that slope to the other half of the route, thinking I could safely ski check that slope. Wrong. And we had gotten numb to all the settlements in the snowpack on route that day, and literally numb on account of the temperature and length of time outside moving slowly. Decision-making suffered accordingly. Second biggest lesson is when the slab broke, I glanced around and everything in my vision was moving. I used precious time before the slab broke up to move across the hill above a bunch of group of trees, which I intended to latch onto. The slab gained speed and I braced for an impact, but the snow acted like water and flowed around the tree. I went from bracing to diving for the tree, which resulted in not getting a good hold. Ski tips tangled in its branches, and now off my feet, head downhill. One of my partners was yelling into his radio, "Jimmy's caught, shot 14A. I'm riding this avalanche head first, and I'm alarmed, thinking, no, shot 14, not 14A. Rescuers going to 14A would find themselves out of position and too low to help. He must have corrected himself after I was under, because a lot of help came to the right place and quickly. In hindsight, the time I used to get above that tree would have been better spent jumping up, getting my tips in the fall line, gaining some speed and skiing off the slab to either side. The flanks were not that far away. I just couldn't see them. The third thing was, you know how literature says not to panic, struggle, and waste oxygen? I thought I wasn't buried deeply, and I struggled mightily. I tried to send a hand to the surface and failed. Pulling it back in, I pulled the snow more tightly against my face. I burned up enough oxygen that I passed out in maybe 3 minutes. Last thought was, I hope these guys are fast. Dispatch log says they had me out in 9 minutes, 6 feet deep. We started putting folding saws on our hasty packs after that, and I started carrying a small one for this and other reasons. Oh yeah, and if one's a chewer, brush your teeth before you pucker up. A note on free heel gear: it's very difficult to jump up, get one's tips in the fall line, and ski off a slab avalanche. When the slab breaks, it wants to pull one's feet out from under if skis are across the fall line. One's tails are being sucked downhill, wrong direction to the fall line if they are free. It's almost impossible. One must be very aggressive to jump up and get one's tips aimed downhill to gain speed to ski off the slab. As an aside, you know, what happened to Crystal the other day, again, why are so many touring parties getting involved with avalanches on the ascent, moving many at a time in free heel mode with skins on the last few years? Don't get it. So 3 weeks later, I'm going for a ride again in bigger terrain. Partner yelling into his radio just like last time. Deja vu. I've always kept the tension light on my toe pieces. Guess I don't twist on them much. One look down the hill convinced me I did not want to go where this thing was going, so I twisted out of my toe pieces, dug and clawed for the bed surface with everything I had. This thing was 4 feet deep, but mostly fast, starting 40 feet above me, and the technique worked. It flowed over me more than it was shoving me down the hill. At one point, the snow got under me and lifted me, but looking down the hill sent me fighting back to the bed surface. When pressure eased and there was some light, I took another look downhill and snagged a small tree going by. Just lay there shaking so hard. It had shoved me about 60 feet down the hill. In denser snow with an ice axe and the right bed surface, this technique has worked well for others too. Air blasting is a technique where one puts explosives in the air above a slope. It's believed 1 meter to be the optimum height. It has greater concussive effects over a larger area than a shot thrown in the snow. Often a protection shot is thrown prior to venturing onto the slope. Running routes will tape an explosive to a piece of bamboo and go out on the slope to a sweet spot, usually lower on the slope than one would imagine. When air blasting a slope that I must remain on, oftentimes my safe hiding zone is on the downside of a tree. First, you got to ask yourself, will the tree remain, or could you unleash a real big tree-eating monster and you don't belong on that slope? If you will remain and the world comes unglued around you, but the tree stays, can you firmly grasp it, or are there no handholds and it's too big to hug? As rescuers, we need to use trees as safe zones as well. Choose well and have a grip. Patrolman is like a cowboy in many ways. One spends days mending fence and tending the herd. Doesn't get off his horse, especially on routes in powder country. Skis or avalanche sails, as I alluded to. I click out of my heels, stand sideways on my skis so that I'm facing uphill. Good position for hugging trees. Too many stories of folks getting sucked off of trees for one of the above reasons. Haven't given any skis away yet, but I'll keep trying. I rehearsed the move of covering my ears for the blast and quickly gaining my handhold before the shot goes off. Speaking of snow sails, is it always a good thing to pull your airbag if you don't want to go where the avalanche will take you? I know it's said that if you don't deploy immediately, you won't, and I believe that. But what if the ride's worse than a possible burial? Can you ski off or grab a tree? Hard decision unless planned out before. It's food for thought anyway. Something I've noticed while making and trying to make avalanches is that if the slope cracks and settles but does not slide, 90% of the time it will not slide later, even with further explosive effort. One always retests after a slope cracks. What does that mean for us? Well, one way to look at it is that a slope that is settled and cracked is 90% safer to be on than one that is not. Identifying slopes that have settled and cracked and are now under new snow is much more difficult than identifying piles of avalanche debris or a crown face under new snow, which are also good signs of a safer place to be. By the way, the crown of an avalanche is the snow remaining above the fracture. Fracture is the crown face, not the crown. The Euros must scratch their heads sometimes reading our reports. And hang fire is a military term for a delayed fire due to munitions malfunction. I wanted to touch on a trend that we've been seeing more of lately. That is shooting to make a rescue site safe before inserting a hasty search team. I was taught and continue to teach that a well-educated, well-equipped, well-experienced team of two can quickly navigate an avalanche, do their job, and safely retire. In and out. A quick in and out is always a good thing. To accomplish this, one needs a good avalanche forecaster. That person is maybe part of the hasty team if no shooting is going to occur. And this is something that has kind of lost traction over the years, but posting avalanche guards to watch for further slides is an often forgotten detail in many hasty searches. One of the first things I think of when I hear the location of an avalanche needing rescue is, where can an avalanche guard be posted for a good view? Do they need a helicopter ride? Is the position in a wilderness area, even if the rescue is not, we should ask for clearance to land that person? A hasty team's safety increases significantly with a good avalanche guard or guards if needed. A lot of rescues that storm so hard as to render a guard useless. Sometimes an avalanche guard can double as communications on a ridge if the site's in a hole. A couple of things about dogs on a rescue. If there's a chance they're live victims, do not clear the site for the dogs. Probing likely places may find someone, and probes let deep scent up for the dogs much quicker than it'll rise on its own. By the time the scent's up on its own from a deep burial, the victim is asphyxiated. However, if it's the next day or later and they're not wearing a beacon, do try to preserve the site for a dog. Reco can be done from the air and as part of the dog team on the ground. Cold bodies do not produce enthusiasm from the dogs. Oftentimes their indication is just showing a little interest, which is difficult to read with a bunch of rescue risk contamination on site. Miscellaneous stuff on dogs. I got time, yeah?
I think we're still got a few minutes, right?
Go ahead and continue there, Jim.
Okay. I think it's really important to use a selection process for these dogs, and you're looking for I look for prey drive if you can get it to tug. Tug is a great reward for high drive labs. One should not play tug. It's only done after finding a human. We want to keep them hungry for their reward. This is super important, you guys. You know, the people that come to the dog schools, my dog doesn't work anymore, and I don't know how to enthuse them. What's your reward? Tug. Do you play tug a lot? All the time. I pick a dog to let, I select them, they get to tug, and that's it. The only time they get to tug is when they find somebody. You want to play tug? Go hide. And then you play tug when they find you. And I train the dogs to bark 3 times when finding a victim. It's necessary because once ranging the dog, it may find someone where you can't see them. They can tell you what they got. Over the years, I've learned that when one is training a mediocre avalanche dog, trying to make it great, the training will often backfire, making the animal even less enthused and effective. A good dog program is able to call mediocrity. It's easy to find a victim when training. The real thing's actually pretty difficult. Anyone getting a puppy for search work, or any puppy for that matter, should use the Volhard selection test. Only thing I'm going to ask you to write down, seriously, Volhard, V-O-L-H-A-R-D. 5-minute test per pup. Enough said, it works. And if serious about training an avalanche search dog, contact me through Mike. It's a simple process if done early and properly. I can help you out as long as the breed is black or yellow. More time, or am I done?
I mean, if you got a few more hands to go.
Well, when I was younger, I really wanted to make this one particular slope slide. It slid. It would then test a much larger slope below and most likely trigger it, erasing some garbage snow there too deep to turn into moguls. So we went out safely above that slope with 6 pounds of explosive, with 4 pounds is plenty around Utah. Taped it to one end of an 8-foot piece of bamboo, lit it, and threw it down onto the slope. I didn't figure the bamboo would stick, but it did, with the bomb 6 feet in the air, waving side to side, being top heavy and all. It wasn't very far away. Shit. The aspen I'm standing above is about 4 inches thick. I tried to sidestep up and out, but the faceted snowpack deemed otherwise. These fuses are 90 seconds, and I had probably clipped 10 seconds off to guarantee a fresh powder train. Back to the tree. Put it between me and the bomb. Think small, cover ears, and open mouth. Boom. My organs moved. My partner yells, "Dude, you're inside the fireball." The slope jumped noticeably into the air and did not slide. Why do my ears always ring? What, Mike? I have a funny story if there's time, but
Yeah, go for it. We can wrap it up maybe at 8:15. So.
well, I've been a member of the Altan Snowbird Ski Patrols for 40 some years, and we've been playing pranks on each other on April Fools for years. And the best prank that's probably happened in the mid 80s, and Christmas time came, and there wasn't any snowmaking then. The ski patrol moved snow facets from slopes down onto roads, and then we try and water it down and turn things into skating rinks. Anyway, Christmas Day, we're going to go out and shovel in this murky, lousy weather. We're going to go shovel snow. And there's these 2 boxes of donuts from the Alta Ski Patrol. Merry Christmas. I had 2 chocolate ones. And I don't know how, because Little Cotton was a pretty small place, but that was all there was. But come April 1st, there's a 2 by 3 foot picture. Well, I don't know, a thing with 3 pictures on it under wraps. We open it up, and on the left it's a sweet tooth certificate, an early generated girl pushing a wheelbarrow full of candy. And on the right, there's a chalkboard, and it says, "Merry Christmas, Happy April Fools, hope you like the donuts." And in the middle was a picture, most of the Alta Ski Patrol bent over with donuts in their nether regions. And that's my last story. That's you.
Yeah. So I think that about wraps it up. Do we have any questions for Jimmy Weiss here?
It does not look like we have any questions.
Okay. I guess that wraps it up. Thanks for joining us for the last presentation of the year, and I guess we'll get out the schedule for next year.
Excellent. We already have the schedule packed for next year. We've got presenters all the way through July. And Michael, thank you very much for putting together tonight's presentation. Great job. A lot of different information. And that's all for tonight. Have a good one, everybody. And we'll see you in January.
Thanks, everybody.